And welcome to County Board Wrap-Up, where every month we question the county board members about the actions they take at their regular public meeting on the issues that affect you, your family, and our community. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and with us this month, as always, is County Board Chair Katie Crystal, and joined this month by Vice Chair Christian Dorsey. Thank you both for being here today.
Pleasure.
Now we're going to be discussing a major redevelopment in the heart of Crystal City, a new swimming pool coming to the Nauck neighborhood, easing restrictions on improving and expanding homes, and quite a bit more. So let's get right to it with the Crystal City redevelopment. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what this redevelopment project is.
Sure. This is a 15-acre, two-phase development right in the heart of what the Crystal City Sector Plan calls the Crystal City Central Business District. So really that heart of where Crystal City folks come together right now predominantly to work, but in the future to live and play as well, which is part of this redevelopment vision.
Now, tell me a little bit, what is the plan there? I know, as you said, right now it's primarily office space. Yeah. What's the goal? What are we thinking?
Well, the goal really is to create a more vibrant 24-hour, or at least evenings and weekends version of Crystal City. So you'll see that achieved in a lot of different ways. For one thing, there's some blocks of inward-facing retail that literally front into the underground that will be flipping, or excuse me, the property owner will be seeking to flip inside out. So we create a much livelier street with a lot of visual interest. In the longer run, this plan lays the groundwork for a major park, a kind of retail-oriented metro market square that'll be a great opportunity for people to gather, participate in farmers markets and festivals, maybe grab a bite to eat and otherwise take advantage of some outdoor dining opportunities.
And from what I understand, it's even more than just the dining. There's a movie theater involved, all kinds of things. Grocery store, that's always a big one. So really just kind of making it more of a 24-hour community, so to speak.
I think that's right. You know, it's I don't know that we'll create a truly 24/7 nightlife, right? We're probably a little away from the city that never sleeps happening there. But certainly, you know, one of the greatest challenges of Crystal City, especially with the high office vacancy we've seen, is the sense that it's a place that empties out after dark. And this is going to be such a lively addition, whether it's the Alamo Cinnamon Draft House, as you mentioned, the restaurants, the grocery store. It's going to create a sense of a place where people live and enjoy themselves. We'll see the addition of new bike lane, pedestrian improvements, a lot more activity, some of the serendipity that happens in great urban spaces where people can interact with one another at all hours, not just on their lunch breaks or in their to or from commute.
Now, I know we have the Crystal City Sector Plan. Is this part of that plan? Does this align with those goals?
You know, it largely aligns with the goals. You'll have certain people who participated in the sector plan process who may quibble with what we entitled the other day because it looks a little bit different. And it does, because there are a lot of circumstances that have changed since the sector plan was approved. But as Katie was saying, I think this actually marries current business realities and current thinking about new metro station entrances in Crystal City, along with what are real opportunities to do anything on that massive 15-acre block that makes a whole lot of sense. And you know, what existed on paper as something that could have been achieved in 3 or 4 decades, we now have the possibility to deliver a fabulous park opportunity sooner rather than later. So I like to tell people it may not look exactly like the plan, but it is definitely within the spirit of the plan.
And I think just as an insight on how the board does its deliberations or approaches our work, you know, part of what's allowed Arlington to develop so successfully on balance over the years is that we set plans and by and large we follow them. And I think we all really wrestled as individuals and collectively with whether this vision that deviated primarily in the topography of that park actually was consistent with the spirit of the sector plan. But for me at least, and I think for my colleagues, you know, we had envisioned a 43,000 square foot retail-oriented public plaza. And that's exactly what we're getting. The configuration's a little different, but I think it really, when you went back and read what the sector plan envisioned for how residents and visitors would experience that Metro Market Square, I think this is really compatible with that vision. And of course, the size is important too. We really don't want to give away any of our planned public spaces. And so this delivering with the full square footage of that planned public park was really important.
Absolutely.
And I think this will also do a lot for Crystal City's market competitiveness. I know, you talk about the office vacancy rate in Crystal City. Will this create more of a life, so to speak, to really make it a little more attractive potential businesses.
Yeah, one of the frequent criticisms I hear about Crystal City is, oh, it feels a little soulless. And quite frankly, that's usually changing for people if they visited Crystal City recently, but I think this sort of continues that momentum and takes it into a different level. A theater is a great amenity, certainly for people who live there, but also for people who work there. My goodness, being able to go catch a show after work is incredibly huge. The grocery store, Metro second entrance, which takes away a huge impediment to getting people to use transit, needing to walk up a fairly steep hill in order to go there, and not even knowing that it's going to be there because you can't see it. So these are all just really dynamic things that make Crystal City look a lot more like some of the vibrant urban communities that people are familiar with elsewhere.
And I know JBG Smith, who owns quite a bit of that property there, they're already kind of paving the way with some of the fun public art.
We've seen some really interesting public art.
And it's getting a lot of attention.
It sure is. And I think it really is emblematic of the fact that increasingly businesses are interested in locating around the same things that residents are. Because talent is king, right? You want to work in a place where you're going to be able to attract the best people, and vibrant public spaces help attract the best people, whether it's to live or work. And so, the centrality of the livability of Crystal City as our goal is also shared by JBG and others who are seeking to lease out some of that office space.
Okay, well, we will see what comes forward, but it sounds like we need to make plans to hang out in that area once all the projects are done. So switching gears a little bit, but it's another improvement to the community. The Nauck neighborhood, the board approved a swimming pool project. Now, we've seen a lot of really interesting improvements to the Nauck neighborhood in recent years. We've talked about it now and then. But let's talk about this one specifically. Where did this come about? How did this come about?
Well, in many ways, this is sort of a back to the future concept because there is a swimming pool that exists that's been closed down, but it was actually active in the 60s through the 90s. The old Veterans YMCA, there was an active swimming pool there, very important in the Nauck neighborhood's history, and for a variety of reasons, it just hasn't been operating. And the Macedonia Baptist Church, which owns it now, wants to reopen it for community use and also to have a partnership with the Water Polo Association. And as part of that, they have plans for a $7 million pool that they're going to work with a private investor to go ahead and build. And it's going to create new swim lane facilities, 7 new swim lane facilities. Also make it a 4-season pool by putting a dome on top of it, and then also constructing a 2-story building that's going to have facilities to service the pool, lockers, showers, as well as a floor of community rooms, which is always necessary. So you've got a really interesting project that's going to serve a lot of needs. Reopening a pool that many people remember fondly, providing much needed pool space in Arlington, but at the same time also providing some good community space as well.
Okay, and we were talking about that. How does this really fit into the vision for Nauck? I mean, especially these community spaces. How does this really fit into the long-term vision for the community? Well,
if you look at it on balance, there are a lot of investments that have gone on in the Nauck neighborhood over the last 15 years or so. I was fortunate to be a part of the planning process for many of them, and quite frankly, you never knew when those were going to happen. And so, what we're looking at are, in the aggregate, a new investment in a spray ground for a park in Nauck. We've had market rate housing and affordable housing developed along the same time, vast improvements along Shirlington Road to add some retail in addition to the housing. And then, of course, we've had some very recent public conversations about investments in the Nauck Town Square, which is going to have some wonderful interpretive history and art, and then in Jenny Dean Park in Nauck as well, where we're going to have a substantial renovation or replacement of all of the existing facilities, modernizing them, making them environmentally sustainable, and also probably making the park a better neighbor to both Nauck and Shirlington through some upgraded lighting and other things. So substantial things going on in Nauck that are pretty impressive.
And I think one one of the things that's exciting is that these uses all really complement and enhance each other. Actually, not entirely unlike what we were just talking about in Crystal City. When we also took an action that actually required us to amend our zoning ordinance to allow ourselves the very flexibility that we then turned around and exercised on setbacks, et cetera, to enable this pool. And as we thought about that and kind of community appropriateness, the fact that Nauck is an area is home to not only this pool, but to so many other compatible civic uses. Well, that makes good planning sense in very literal ways. For example, the fact that it's Macedonia's Baptist Church will be the owner and manager of this pool, as well as the church, as well as the facility that a relatively new speaking preschool. All in that same block, it allows them to manage the parking better, liaise with the community better. So even in those kind of very literal planning ways, these uses are compatible. And then, of course, in terms of building a community, right? The opportunity for churchgoers to be part of this community facility in the pool, the opportunity for kids at the preschool to learn to swim, the opportunities for families to come for a baseball game and swim lessons on the same day. It's just, you really see the opportunity for people to build their lives around the institutions in their community, and that's exactly what we're trying to do.
And Nauck has such a rich history here in Arlington. To see the community benefits in Nauck grow. And I can't wait to see how the Knocktown Square project finishes up. I've heard so much about some of the history projects that are going along with it and the art going along with that project. It's going to be interesting to see that come in the future.
And one thing we didn't even mention was the major civic institutional facility there, Drew School, which is soon going to become a neighborhood school again. And with this pool online, it's going to be it's probably going to become the elementary school in closest proximity to a pool where potentially there could be some partnerships. So all sorts of interesting things that are afoot.
All right, well, we will wait and see. We're going to take a short break right now, and when we return, we'll take a look at the county manager's recommendations for closing up the fiscal year 2018 budget and what's on the board members' minds as they look ahead to fiscal year 2020 budget. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm here with County Board Chair Katie Crystal and Vice Chair Christian Dorsey, who are filling us in on some of the key actions the board took at its October meeting. So let's talk about the closeout of the fiscal year 2018 budget. What does this mean, a closeout? Fiscal year 18 finished in June.
So closeout is more or less exactly what it sounds like. It's the process of closing out the books, balancing what we spent versus what we planned, and what of the allocated monies didn't get spent. And so this year, that amount totals about $22 million, a little less, in unspent, unrestricted funds that we are then going to, on balance, both allocate to reserves and then carry over to next year. But essentially, closeout is saying, what did we plan to spend? Did we spend more or less? We are always trying to spend less, as suffice it to say, we don't really have an option to go into the red.
Right.
So it's sort of how close to that zero line are we trying to get? And in fact, in recent years, the departments, the county manager, have really managed to a much smaller pool of closeout dollars, which is something that we often heard from the public they really wanted to see. They took that as a sign that the board and the manager were asking for what we needed and needed what we were asking for. But the other pretty important stakeholder that was less excited to see us managing closer to zero were the rating agencies, who really measure our fiscal practices and want to make sure that we stay worthy of that AAA bond rating that allows us to borrow money at relatively low interest rates. So this is perhaps the pendulum swinging a little bit back in the other direction of a little more money at closeout, which from the point of view of kind of our long-term fiscal picture is perhaps not a bad thing. And I think on this year, in the case of this year, generally results the fact that the manager and the department heads had slowed down hiring in anticipation of another tough budget year ahead.
So what were the county managers' then key recommendations for how we allocate those closeout funds? I mean, you said some would be rolled over. How's that going to be used then?
Well, it's up to us to decide how the bulk of that is used.
We get a sneak preview here.
So, as part of the upcoming budget process, that provides some flexibility for us to deal with what is a fairly substantial gap that the manager anticipates presenting to us as part of the fiscal 20 budget. So that's where the bulk of it's coming from. But those reserves we cannot overstate how important those are. I think the analogy for for many people that may help is, people who are determining your credit worthiness not only look at how close you come to spending what it is you make, it's also your ability and capacity to save. That's a critical piece. And Arlington, while hewing to a community's desire not to be overtaxed, which is a good thing, absolutely, we were kind of skirting to and maybe falling on the wrong side of demonstrating our ability to save and deal with shocks or headwinds or uncertainty in the government. So we have to balance that. And this is a step in making sure those reserves are balanced. And then we're going to have some tough but very community-driven processes to determine how we use those other resources.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that I think one of our communications and expectations conversations that we'll need to have, $16.5 million in the manager's recommendation that I think the board is likely leaning towards adopting, but we'll have a good conversation about that in November. $16.5 million to be rolled over to those discussions in fiscal year 2020, which again, kind of consistent with what the community is saying. We'd like to see not kind of a separate budget allocation process in the fall for closeout and then another one in the spring to talk about it all at once. But the real challenge and the nuance that I think we'll have to really emphasize in communicating is this is one-time money, right? And so the metaphor that we always use is when your grandmother sends you a birthday check, you don't want to rely on that to pay your rent.
Well, this is true, right?
And so here, there are always one-time costs and opportunities that come up on the budget. Planning exercises, for example, are a great example, or one-off opportunities to do pay-go for capital. But many of the things that this community prioritizes and wants, whether it's hiring teachers, paying firefighters more to stay competitive, or other things, those are ongoing year-over-year costs. And so we are going to have a little bit of a $16.5 million, or a lot, actually, that's a big figure, $16.5 million carryover amount to think about allocating. But I think it might be tempting to say, great, $16.5 million, that solves most of that $30 million budget
Not
gap.
at all.
And it's really important to make that distinction, now and as we go throughout the budget, that this is one-time money for one-time priorities. It wouldn't be sound fiscal practice to close an operating budget gap ongoing with that money.
And so it is still a little bit early to talk 2020 fiscal year budget, but I know you folks have been meeting about it for quite some time now already before that budget kind of comes forth for the next year. But I know you mentioned it's going to be another lean year. Yeah. What should the community be prepared for, essentially?
I think having an honest discussion about all options. And when you talk about all options, that does mean tax rate increases. If you look at last year, we dealt with just about every fee that we have available to us outside of the property tax rate. But when you're talking about closing substantial gaps, our tax base is made up on the revenue side about 60% from the real estate tax rate. So that's got to be on the conversation, as will significant program cuts. We did a lot of what many people would call efficiencies last year.
Sure.
You don't have those tools year after year. At some point, you've really got to talk about programs and services as a way to close a gap of the size that we're talking about. So we've predetermined nothing, but there's no way we're going to not have a robust conversation about those alternatives or those possibilities to deal with a very significant budget gap.
That's absolutely right. And I would even go further as to say, in terms of over the last couple of years, we've sought to achieve not only efficiencies, we've made real programmatic cuts as part of the fiscal 19 budget. We did eliminate programs, et cetera. I think they were all incredibly thoughtful, and I really credit the county manager to figure out, what need government maybe not be in the business of anymore. One of the examples I give all the time from our last budget process is in a county with the lowest unemployment rate in a commonwealth with one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, do we need to be investing as aggressively in job training programs, right? So we scaled those back. We scaled that program back considerably to really focus on those members of our community most in need. But that's a great example of we've done that look, both at efficiencies and then scaling back the things that maybe are outside of core government operations. And now we're talking about the things that people really hold sacred, right? So it's going to be absolutely a difficult conversation. You know, the best thing that we can ask people to do is to participate in the process. You know, we've started actually including in our, about every 4 years or so, we do a community satisfaction survey. There were questions about the budget there, so we have some good and validated survey data to help us with that decision, but we'll do a number of additional community surveys, public hearings, workshops, roundtables. There'll be a lot of ways for people to engage. And I hope that people will join us to the extent they're capable or interested in looking at the big picture and recognizing that we aren't just a series of individual interests in Arlington County, we're a whole, and we're trying to stay strong and healthy together as we weather a challenging budget time.
And you know, one thing we know is if you take the composite recommendation from people when they do surveys or give guidance on the budget, it is to maintain services and keep taxes the same. That's not going to be possible this year.
It's quite the balancing act when you try to do that. So, well, I'm sure this is something we're going to be talking about for months to come.
Indeed we are.
So we'll leave it there for now, and we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, I'm going to ask the board about making it easier to renovate or expand some of Arlington's older, smaller houses, as well as what issues remain to be resolved before the board adopts the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan. We'll be right back. Welcome back to County Board Wrap Up. We're going to take a look now at a few more hot topics with County Board Chair Katie Crystal and Vice Chair Christian Dorsey. Let's talk a little bit on this easing restrictions on what's called non-conforming homes. First, before we get started, what is a non-conforming home?
You know, it doesn't mean that the owners of the home have done anything wrong. It's not illegal. It's just that that home existed prior to the zoning ordinance that covers the lot designation that it has. So it's non-conforming with the zoning ordinance, not non-conforming with Arlington County.
No rule breakers.
No rule breakers. But what it has really done is limited the ability of people who own a non-conforming home to make changes to it. Because roughly speaking, generally, if you want to make a change to a non-conforming home, you need to make it conforming, which not so easy in all cases. And this really became expressly manifest with people who own duplexes, other small multifamily or two-family dwellings in certain zoning districts who wanted to just simply make modest additions to accommodate a family, and found that they couldn't do it. And we had no way to enable it, even though we all kind of agreed early on, yes, we want to make that happen. Yeah. So we had a fairly expedited process by Arlington standards to engage the public, use our Planning Commission's zoning committee, did a study, staff did tremendous work to bring us a proposal that effectively allows these homes, which were previously, once you decided that you wanted to add to it and you found out you couldn't, your only recourse was to sell and move on. Yeah. Now we're giving those families an option where singles can turn into growing families, or for whatever reason, you can make both the interior and exterior changes to your home and even modestly build it out so that you can stay there. And it can be something that contributes to our affordable housing goals, and it doesn't require any taxpayer subsidy to make it happen, which is terrific.
And I think it's important too to say, it keeps the families in these homes. It also keeps these homes in Arlington, right? When land values are as high as they are here in Arlington County, a home is not just going to lay fallow, right? You're going to have the pressure probably of a developer interest to try to acquire both halves of that duplex. It's non-conforming, so they can't build it back as a duplex with two semi-affordable halves. They're probably going to tear it down and build a very large single-family house, which is what that lot allows for. So it really is a way of preserving this option, not only for the family who currently lives in it to make it work for their needs, but to keep that, relatively speaking, more affordable ownership option within our housing stock.
Which, of course, is something we hear that we need desperately here in Arlington, is that availability of
That's right.
affordable housing.
And this is, I think, kind of the knife's edge of a whole body of work that we're so excited about. And our colleague, Eric, was mentioning this in his board report this month, the need to think more expansively about the types of ownership housing stock in particular that we allow throughout the county. As you know, people point out all the time, your options, if you're looking to buy in Arlington these days, feel like an expensive high-rise condo or an expensive, very large single-family house. It disadvantages young families who maybe don't have the capital to buy in or just don't want a space that large, but it disadvantages other folks, like, for example, our retirees who are ready to downsize out of a larger house that they raise their kids in, but would like to stay in a neighborhood that's important to them. And so how do we think about legalizing, right, allowing these types of alternatives? When we say most of these duplexes are non-conforming, it means that it's hard to build a duplex in most places in Arlington County now. It's not possible to build, for example, a series of small cottages or a fourplex or sixplex. And so there is a whole body of work out there for us, and I see this action as a great way to kickstart it, about thinking about how we can legalize and introduce these alternative forms throughout the county.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see what folks do to upgrade or make these minor improvements to their homes as a result.
I think we probably have people who have been chomping at the bit.
I'm sure they have been.
That's right. And this actually, to staff's credit first and foremost, really, for expediting this. It takes a long time to do a zoning ordinance change in Arlington, and our staff really deserves kudos for making it happen. But a couple of owners of these duplexes really deserve kudos for digging in, doing the research, bringing it to the board's attention. It's a great example of an action that makes our zoning ordinance, I think, better, more reflective of our values, and I really believe it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the advocacy of a few individuals in particular.
Okay.
And you know, this combined with the pool, incremental steps, you know, the zoning ordinance is quite big, so, you know, doing comprehensive reviews of it are not really possible, so you have to take surgical strikes when you can. But it's a recognition that Arlington has changed a lot since the zoning ordinance was created. And even though we've made changes over the years, there's still a lot of legacy issues which very much reflect a less developed, broad suburban sensibility as opposed to moving us close to the fairly urbanized core that we've become.
Well, then finally, just a quick note, kind of a coming soon, as you will.
Watch this space.
The board, soon to be here. The board has set some public hearings for the 4-mile Run Valley area plan. Now, we've been talking about this, we were mentioning for quite some time. Are we nearing the end of this planning process now with these public hearings?
We are. So as close watchers of the county board might know, we took some actions last month to approve a parks master plan. And this planning process was unique, actually, in that it joined both a planning process and a parks planning process and an area planning process together.
Wasn't that the first time?
I think for the first time, yeah. So this takes up the latter part of that, and so it's almost, you can imagine the parks and then everything else, right? Parking, for example, transportation, traffic flow, other public facilities, zoning, for example. Although largely at the recommendation of the working group, the zoning will not change too dramatically. So this is kind of the everything else that makes for public spaces. We advertise it this month, which means that we will welcome public input and hearings and a more fulsome board discussion next month at our November meeting.
Okay, well, folks interested can make their plans for that particular meeting to get their voices heard. Well, we're going to end it there. Thank you for joining us for a deep dive discussion into the issues of this October County Board meeting. And thank you, Katie and Christian, for offering your insights and joining us here today. Remember, all the county board meetings are open to the public and live streamed and archived on our website. That's arlingtonva.us. Just search County Board. And if you want to tell us what you think about these issues and more, visit the county website at topics.arlingtonva.us/engage. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we'll see you next month right here on County Board Wrap Up.